of this evening on is the pen tool. And we introduced that towards the end of last night when we were creating the fox, and adding some additional parts to it. And then, of course, when we needed extra points or we were converting a line from being a straight line into a curved line, we used the convert anchor point tool. So we're going to elaborate on those tools a little bit more. Now, the book, as you can tell, doesn't really talk about that tool in detail until about chapter 7, which is obviously way later on in the class. However, I personally feel like it's a tool that we need to start practicing and mastering way before that, because you're obviously going to be using this tool a lot. And it also kind of helps understand the concept of this point and path scenario that is what vector shapes are all about anyway. So we are going to go over to the toolbar and click on the pen tool. It is one of the tools that has multiple tools. So if you click and hold on the button, you'll get this little flyout that then demonstrates that there is a pen tool, an add anchor point tool, the delete anchor point tool, and then of course the anchor point tool. So this set of tools actually is in every Adobe product, and it pretty much works the same in all of those. Not everybody uses them in the other applications, but you can use it in Photoshop, you can use it in InDesign. But of course, it was originally created for the most part to incorporate in Illustrator. Now, there are a couple of unique features when you use it in Illustrator that are actually a little bit beneficial. So I'm not really sure why they don't integrate those into the other Adobe products, but it is what it is. And I'll show you what that is here in just a second. But to create this crown shape that we're looking to do here, obviously in these practice scenarios, we've got guides that we're going to follow, templates that we're going to follow. Now, real world scenario, if you wanted some type of template to follow, you're probably going to do a hand sketch, somehow scan it in or take a picture of it, bring it into Illustrator, and then, then go over the top of it. But in this case, obviously, for us to get the concept of how the tools work and to run through some exercises, we've got to have something to look at and kind of understand the step-by-step process, if you will. So as you can see, taking a look at the artboard that contains the crown artwork, I'm going to take the pen tool, and I'm just going to simply click on the first dot, or the number 1. And as soon as I click and release my mouse, I don't have my mouse held down or anything. I'm just simply moving it around. And you can see the line as it follows my cursor. And so for straight lines, all you do is then go establish the next point, and the software will automatically connect the dots, if you will. So I'm just going to go up to point 2 and click. Now I can actually see the physical stroke itself. Now, if I was going to do this actually with some type of sketched artwork that I had hand drawn, or maybe I even captured an image or artwork from a website and I use that as a template now in Illustrator, I always encourage people to set your color for the stroke to a pink, and then make it a fairly thick, 2 to 4 points in width. That way you actually can see it really well. If this was, markered artwork or penciled artwork that we had sketched, and now we're trying to draw these black outlines over the top of it, sometimes it can get a little hard to see that information. So that's why I always suggest people use a bright pink or some type of bright color if pink's not your thing. That way you actually see the path as you're building it. So the straight lines are fairly simple. I'm just going to go to step number 3, click again. Now, one other thing that you have to pay attention to is when you're creating these paths, there's actually 2 types of paths. There's what we call an opened path, and then we have a closed path. And a closed path, for the most part, is what we consider a shape. Okay, that means we've actually ended at the very beginning point. When we have an open path, it means we never went back to the beginning point. Now, whether it's opened or closed, you'll notice that if I have a fill color, which I do right now, it's the default white, then it will actually assume that it's supposed to fill in this area. And so you can see it start to covering up step number 3 and step number 1. And that's because Illustrator is assuming that these 2 points are eventually going to get connected. And even if we don't connect them, so for example, if I go up to step number 4, notice I didn't connect them, but I still have this area that looks like it's covering up the numbers. And that's because it still feels like it's supposed to, and little pun intended there, I didn't mean to say it feels like, but it will fill this area. Okay. So again, the other thing that I encourage people to do is if you're going to use this technique to outline, then get rid of the fill color. And now you can see that I'm just solely looking at the stroke. And that way it doesn't distract from anything else that's going on. So then I'm just going to simply go to step number 5 and click. Move my cursor over to step number 6 and click. And then go down to step number 7 and click. Now, if I did want to connect this to make it a complete shape, which would be similar to what you were looking at up in the screen above it, then I would take my pen tool and go back over to the very first point that we started with. And you'll see a little visual indicator when you've connected with that point, because there'll be a little circle next to your pen icon. And when you see that circle, that's when you click. And now I have a closed path. In this case, a shape, and that shape happens to be the shape of a crown. If, on the other hand, I was completed and I didn't want to connect point 7 to point 1, then what I would want to do is switch over to my selection tool, and that way the line disappears that was following my cursor. And so in this case, I just hit the letter V on my keyboard, which is the keyboard shortcut for the selection tool. You can see that it does create a bounding box around the perimeter of all the points. So of course that tells you that it's now selected. And if you want to deselect it, just click somewhere off of the artboard. Now, in this case, let's assume that I decided I did want to actually close this path, and I've already performed too many other steps that it's probably not worth my time to undo everything and then get back to this point being active. So you can connect points by using the pen tool. What you would do in this case is first select the path that you're working with, then grab the pen tool, and you're actually going to click on the last point that you were working with, and then go over and click on the very first one. And you can see it's now connected, because if I place my cursor on that first point, I get the little circle indicator. And again, now I have the closed path, and if I apply a fill color, you can see that it actually fills that entire area. So straight lines are fairly simple. So I'm going to go ahead and have you work on this arrow if you haven't already tried to proceed to it. Should be fairly similar as well. So I'll give you a couple minutes to work on that.
When you're clicking the first, like if you do on number 1 on the arrow, and you want to make sure that you line it up with where you click 7, so that when you enclose it, it's actually a straight line that's completely horizontal. Is there a trick for that?
Say that again, sorry.
So like if I click on number 1 on the arrow,
yep,
I want to make sure once I go all the way around that from 7 to 1 is actually a horizontal line. How can you guarantee that without being a little bit off? Is there a trick to it, or?
Yeah, you can't really guarantee it from the beginning unless you were to put a guideline there. Okay. And so in order to put a guideline, of course, you need to have your rulers visible. And to make your rulers visible, you can do one of two things. You can use the keyboard shortcut, which is Control-R or Command-R. Or you can go up to the menu bar to the word View, Rulers, and this would say Show Rulers. Okay. And so once the rulers are visible, then I can take my cursor, place it in the top horizontal ruler, click, hold, and drag down, and then give myself a guideline that I would just make sure that I land on when I'm creating my points. If by chance you didn't do that, then the way you would resolve it is if the points happen to be slightly offset, you'll switch to a different tool, which is that direct selection tool, remember, which allows you to select individual points, and you would just select the one that you're wanting to alter and either move it up or down and then you would see it square itself off.
Okay. I knew there was a way to do it. I just couldn't remember how.
Yeah, no, good question.
Thanks.
Now, that being said, you can also use this technique to help you keep lines 100% vertical and 100% horizontal. For example, if I click on step number 1 and then I hold down the shift key, notice how that line jumps from the position of my pen tool right in line with the gray template. And that's because holding down the shift key will keep this line 100% vertical. And so then I'll just move my cursor into position, click with my mouse. Now, if I wanted to go completely horizontal, same technique. Hold down the shift key. You can see how the path jumps up. Of course, I need to put my cursor in position, click with the point. Now, you wouldn't want to do that from point 3 to 4 because obviously this is not a vertical or a horizontal line. It's an angle. So you're just going to go up to somewhere in the middle of point 4, click, go over to point 5, click, hold down the shift key again to 6, hold down the shift key to 7. And again, if the lines from 5 to 6 and 2 to 3 are not 100% in a line, then I would want to start off with a guide first in order to assist me with that so I don't have to go back and do a bunch of editing. And then we do want to close this, so I am going to take my cursor back to point number 1, make sure I see that little circle next to the icon, click with my mouse. If I didn't apply a fill color, if I didn't apply a stroke color, then you're going to see this blue outline. And you can see anytime that the points are not 100% in the exact same spot, you will see jaggedness, as you can see right here. So point 1 to point 7 is not exactly in the same alignment. So I am going to switch over to my direct selection tool, and you can actually see the jaggedness here as well. It's a little bit tougher to see when you zoom in really close, but right there, and then of course right over here as well. So when I switch to the direct selection tool, I still want to hold down the shift key because I want to make sure that the point from 6 to 7 stays 100% vertical, but I might have to make some adjustments first. And again, I might have to even create a guideline there just to make sure I'm 100% level, which is probably what it looks like I'm going to have to do here. Now, there are some other techniques too. This is a little bit more later on in the book, but you could take the direct selection tool, select both of these points at the base, and then use some of these alignment features like this one right here, vertical align bottom, and then that will position both of the points in the same alignment. So there are techniques to do it, but obviously if you're going to think through it from the initial standpoint, you'd be better off setting up some guides first and then just making sure you click on those guides. Easy enough?